Our next panel explores the newest technologies and their impact on design, gaming, art, music, advertising, and ultimately social change. This panel will address the looming public fears about the misuse of technological innovations and offer potential solutions for avoiding negative impacts. Please join me in welcoming to the stage panel moderator Samantha Wolfe, the founder and CEO of Pitch Forward, Asha Easton, Immerse UK lead at Innovate UK KTN, Dr. Julien Weissenberg, founder of Deep Tech Experts, and Akbar Hamid, founder and CEO of The Fifth Column and 5 Crypto.
How's everybody doing? So somebody asked me today, they're like, what is this panel about that I was hosting? And I was like, we're just going to talk about all of the future of technology, just a little subject. Just attempting to do that in our 45 minutes. But I was so honored to be asked to be a part of this panel. And then when I was told who was on it, I have to admit I got a little intimidated when I looked at everybody's bios. And so I'm like super excited, and that's why I was like, let's just cover all of these things and see so we can all learn from these folks and have a little bit of an insight of what's coming. So the way that I'm gonna attempt to structure, and we'll see, I tend to like to go with the flow, a bit is to talk a little bit, do introductions, talk a bit about creativity, about brands, about advocacy, and then offer up and sort of wrap up with some advice. So, but first, if you can all introduce yourself, and I said your favorite future technology, and why. And so we'll go sort of like here to there.
Yes, hi everyone. Akbar Hamid. I'm the founder and CEO of The Fifth Column, which is one of the leading creative communications agencies driving forward the convergence of brands, emerging tech, innovation, gaming. We work with a lot of incredible companies in the Web3 metaverse space, like The Sandbox, like Doodles. I'm not sure if you all are following or if you all are fans of Camp. If you have young kids, Doodles just announced a big partnership with Camp. So it's really interesting to see an NFT brand now creating a kids experience at their store in Chicago. So it's really, these NFT brands are now becoming just entertainment brands. And with The Sandbox, we're creating a lot of fun games that have social change missions that we'll talk about as well. And then we're also advising a lot of the big groups like L'Oreal, Richemont, LVMH, how they should embrace gaming, emerging tech, innovation as really a layer of their marketing strategies and not something completely separate, because that doesn't work. And then also I'm the co-founder of People of Crypto Lab, and that is a innovation lab and studio building in virtual worlds through the lens of culture. And that's been really incredible because we're actually guiding brands in how to embrace cultural moments like Pride, like Hip Hop 50, like Diwali, and bring in their authentic brand message in gaming worlds through these narratives. So it's been really, really fun.
Hi everyone, my name is Asha Easton and I run an organization called Immerse UK, which is the UK government's innovation network for immersive and metaverse technologies. And we are part of a large organization called Innovate UK KTN. And the point of the large organization is to facilitate cross-sector innovation across kind of all industries in the UK and to help companies to access things like R&D grant funding for their businesses. At Immerse UK, we work specifically across the XR ecosystem. Our role is really to help to grow it, make it less fragmented, connect the different kind of hubs across the country, help UK businesses to scale and connect them with the academic community. And all the work that we do kind of feeds back into the government to determine future policy and for the space, R&D funding strategy around Immerse specifically. So that's my day job, but on the side I also do a number of different things as well. I helped co-found something called the XR Diversity Initiative, which helps to upskill people from underrepresented backgrounds with with XR skills and help get their foot in the door into the industry. That's really the reason for being, helping people get their hands on kit they might not have access to, getting them to rapidly prototype something in a day so they feel confident that they can actually, maybe take that route into the industry. And then I also sit on the board of the first Metaverse Fund for Europe, FOV Ventures, helping them with their kind of diversity initiatives.
And I'm Julien Weissenberg. I'm an AI expert. My background is in computer vision and machine learning. And I work mostly for investors. I check startups for them, see if the tech is good. I'm also an expert for the Swiss Innovation Agency. And I'll start answering the question about favorite technology. It's still AI. I've been in the field for 14 years now, but I still think it's the future. And what I like about it, why I love it, is because I think it tells a bit about a piece of ourselves. If we understand how to replicate intelligence, maybe we understand a bit how we work as well.
Amazing. And I'm Sam Wolfe. I realized I didn't introduce myself. I work on branding, marketing, and business strategies with emerging technology. I've co-authored a couple of books, one on the metaverse that came out in February, and sort of all of the metaverse over 20 different industries. And I'm about to start my 4th year as an adjunct at NYU. I've taught business of AR and VR, marketing of emerging tech, business in the metaverse, and avatar and virtual beings. So I love this stuff, is this simple. And I love explaining it and helping people to understand it. You what?
We need that.
Yes. Okay. So one of my favorite things about emerging tech is how it can actually enable creativity and art and new ways of doing things. And it's almost like after the developers develop it, then the artists get their hands on it. And so how have you seen that happen within, your organizations, and what do you think of the potential of these technologies for creativity?
It's such a powerful tool. One aspect that's really interesting is exploring identity with avatars, and what is your identity when you show up in virtual worlds and virtual spaces. And so that's been a really interesting conversation, because are you showing up as yourself, and do you want to show up as yourself, or do you want to show up as something that you believe you are? So that's been really interesting for us as we're exploring social movements and just different social issues, because it's really incredible in a game if you are exploring your identity, whether it's your sexual identity, your gender identity, and in a gaming world you can show up as something maybe that makes you feel more like your authentic self that you're not ready to embrace in the real world yet. So those are really interesting conversations, because what a platform to make somebody feel sort of included and seen and heard, and for them to kind of be able to test different things, and then also just imaginary ways, right? Like, we're exploring with brands. If you're a luggage brand, how do you reimagine the luggage in a virtual world or gaming space? Like, does it give you special powers? Does it give you access, like IRL access to unique destination experiences? So there's so much creativity in the sandbox, specifically, relating to fashion and culture. We're exploring like wings, and how could wings give your avatar a specific set of skills or utility. So I think it's interesting, because we sit in brainstorms, and I sit with my team, who all come from traditional marketing and communications backgrounds, and it really feels like we're kids again, which is really, really fun, because we're sitting around and we're like, we start laughing, because we're talking about like wings and dragons, and and we're talking about an LVMH brand, and really they're giving us the authority to explore it in this way. So I think it really has brought us back to that childlike sensibility, which I think is so important when you are being a creative. So I think it's been a really nice reset.
What about you, Ash?
I think the thing that's been the most interesting for me in this position in Immerse has been watching the evolution of storytelling in XR over the years, and the way that UX and UI design has evolved, the way people, take on board more the onboarding and offboarding of people into experiences, and the innovation that's gone on behind that. In the UK, we have some of the most amazing projects. You've probably seen people who've been in the circuit of the festivals. We see UK projects winning, quite regularly, and just seeing where that's gone, it's been really incredible. And I think, for me, the thing I'm most excited about in the future of XR creativity is around the low-code, no-code tools that are out there, or the kind of 3D design tools that enable people to design in 3D without needing to actually know how to, program. Things like Shapes XR, being able to, sculpt or paint or do whatever you can in virtual space. That's what I'm really interested in.
And then, Julien, I'm going to have to ask the flip side of things, and sort of generative AI and creativity, and for the good or for the bad. Do you have sort of perspectives on both?
Yeah, of course. So first of all, I think the impact of Gen AI on creativity is that there has been a mega trend of the industrial revolution, of standardizing products and making them mass scale. And this is, I think, about to get reversed when we can personalize games and create experiences which are for certain, like for each and every individual could be a different experience. So that's one thing. And then the second thing is, think of photography as a technology back then, how this disrupted the painter's business. Because until then you had painters that were paid to depict what they saw, and all of a sudden they would start to not be so relevant anymore. So then they completely changed their work, and that's how they moved from depicting realistic things to abstract art, and that's why maybe you had all these Picassos and so on. So today I think the same might happen, where if it's so easy to create a video game, then maybe we'll see different kinds of video games that the AIs cannot create yet.
That's amazing. So in terms of, I know that the access and funding, Asha, you get very involved in that. Can you talk a little bit about how to make sure that people are, that it's not just sort of the few people who get access to be able to create? How do we broaden that?
I think we had a really interesting conversation yesterday around, like, for me, the problem with access is that I feel like there's like a broken pipeline of all the interventions that need to happen to actually be more welcoming and opening and accessible to more people. So a lot of diversity initiatives, for example, that exist are small scale, they're underfunded, they're volunteer run, they're not speaking to each other or working together. And I think that there's like a whole, we're bringing together a bunch of different working groups in Immerse, one on diversity, inclusion, accessibility, sustainability, ethics, and it's about bringing together anyone doing work in those spaces so they're speaking to each other and making sure that we're, the way I like to put it is, for example, XRDI, right? It's get the foot in the door, program something in a day, but what journey do people need to go on to then either branch off into a career in any of these spaces, or to become a founder in these spaces that can then be funded by someone like FOV, and there's like a whole series of intervention and help that needs to happen on that whole journey, and I think that is still really, really broken at the moment. But there's still a huge potential and opportunity for us to all work together and fix that.
Yeah, absolutely. So for me, sort of what happens after a certain amount of creativity and artists, that brands come in and say, wow, we could do this. How are we going to use this? And figure out how to create sort of new stories, new ways to tell, brand storytelling, not necessarily strict creative storytelling, and that's where your company comes in. So can you talk a little bit about how these technologies have sort of changed? You said already you're thinking about flying dragons and so on and so forth, but how are these different technologies impacting those discussions even more?
Yeah, absolutely. And right before I jump into that, I wanted to just, on the point of funding, we did a research report with Boston Consulting Group, one of our strategic partners, and they found that only 13% of founding teams of Web3 emerging tech startups included at least one woman, and only 3% had an executive team that is exclusively female. So it's crazy. And but yes, there's a lot of opportunity to affect change, but we have to start with the mindset shift from the ground up. So that's a lot of the work that we're doing as well, by bringing in storytelling around around women of color, LGBTQIA, disabled community, because we need to bring those people in to start working in the ecosystem to then have these ideas come to life that can then be funded. And we need more women like Caitlin Holloway, who's a partner at 776, Alexis Ohanian, his fund, and she's really leading the charge there. And so more women like her who are funding startups that are run by women. So we have a lot of work to do, but we're still so early on.
Yeah, and you need more diversity in VC as well. In order to that, we need more diversity in VC. We need more diversity across the board in founders and creatives. We need more access to, for example, R&D funding in government. It's someone made a comment in a previous panel which was saying how it's understanding how to even access the grant funding in government. It's not, I'm in government, okay, and I'm telling you it's so complicated, and people even to find us and to find these opportunities is very difficult. Then to understand how to get them, very difficult, to know who to speak to. All of this stuff can be hopefully demystified by something like AI, but there's so many different layers to the funding journey and different aspects need to be shifted.
I mean, I think that's why sometimes it is that you get the funding, you want the grant to be able to do the creative, but sometimes the funding can come from brands to be able to create something new, sort of different and exciting, and it's not necessarily like sell kind of advertising, which I can't stand, but more like experiential.
Well, that's the workaround, right? To go straight to private funding.
Yeah, and that's a great segue into brands and their narratives in the space, and sort of also coinciding with different funds. Like the Sandbox actually has a game maker fund, and they'll fund startups and companies with great vision, anywhere from $10,000, $20,000 to $200,000, depending on the scale of the game. So there are things like that, but I only know that because we work with them. So I think there is a bit more we need to do on the outreach, but there are programs, and I think this is sort of an interesting story because it's my journey of founding a startup while having a company, which was based in this, and then also bringing in the funding from L'Oreal. And so it's really about creating, the idea and the vision. And for us, what we did, what we're realizing with brands is initially it was all about the hype and the announcement, which we saw in the last 2 years. Everybody just wanted to be first. And a lot of brands and portfolios like LVMH were last to e-commerce, so they want to be first to Web3. So everybody was just trying to make announcements that had no real connectivity
or
and substance. Or community, because they were just trying to, be first movers and not be last in tech. Now we're seeing brands really take the time to look at their narrative, work with companies like ourselves and different development studios of what's our story, what's the story we want to tell, how do we want to bring that through. So with L'Oreal and NYX Cosmetics specifically, they're a brand that stands for supporting the LGBTQIA+ community year round. That's their entire platform is Pride 365. And so when we were connected with them, we we were already building this first ever Metaverse Pride moment that was greenlit by the Sandbox through the Game Maker Fund. So we went to them with an idea and a vision, and literally they believed in it so much in bringing diverse and inclusive storytelling to their gaming world that they gave us a $200,000 grant to build this game, which was absolutely incredible. And it was literally, me taking the initiative to write a really heartfelt email after a 5 a.m. meditation with zero filters. And it was a bit tricky because it was also my client on the agency side, but then me also writing as a human and just writing a really long email. And literally it was greenlit in 15 minutes. They thought it was brilliant, and they loved that there was somebody with that passion to bring in a whole new community to an ecosystem and also give voices to community members that hadn't felt the power to maybe share their story. So it was a mix of that and being greenlit to build that, but then thinking, is there a brand that might fit well with the narrative and help us reach 20 more million people through their following, and bring in new audiences. So that was a really a great example of sort of a perfect partnership of sorts. But we created the whole game narrative, and it was essentially bringing in queer, disabled community, LGBTQIA drag queens, and it was a whole quest built around learning about Pride and then ending up at a Pride party in the sky. It was just meant to be fun and informative, and it wasn't developed into a really intense game narrative yet. We only had 90 days to bring it to life. And what was really impactful about this is on the brand side is the brand decided that this had nothing to do with product, which is really important in these experiences and in these ecosystems. Specifically in the sandbox and others we work with, people don't want to see a product. That's not kind of the experience they want. You don't put a literal mirror image. They want to have a meaningful experience, and the brand should come through in the narrative. So we had a dance floor in the game where you could go with your avatar and dance and have fun and interact, and it said "Say Gay" because the legislation that was happening last June, in Florida. So we were bringing in sociocultural, political messages, but in a really subtle way, so that people could come in and kind of feel that they're taking a stand and share. We had a lot of people sharing screen grabs of that on Twitter, and so the brand, and we put in a lot of the brand's messaging and the slogans that they stand for without the actual brand itself. But it was very obvious if you did know the brand that it was a NYX Cosmetics experience. And on the social impact side, what was incredible with Metaverse and these virtual worlds is they're global. So if you have access to internet and a computer, which I know we're still far behind in many places of the world, but you can access these worlds. So the huge impact, which we were hoping for and didn't know that would happen, was we had people from parts of the world where it's illegal to celebrate being LGBTQA, like India, like Pakistan, like parts of Southeast Asia, come in and share in our Discord. It was the first time that they celebrated their identity. So that to us, and I think even to the brand, was extremely powerful beyond any brand message, just giving a platform where people were seen and heard, and those kinds of games and those kinds of worlds can definitely be life-saving moments when people are struggling with their identity. So I think we just scratched the surface of what the possibility could be. So yeah, that's one example of how a brand and a huge brand, global brand, is leaning into this.
That's really interesting, yeah. I think the LGBTQ Museum by Antonio Forster also had like a pretty similar reaction. It was like touring the last year, yeah.
Mm-hmm, absolutely. So diversity and inclusion in AI. I feel like there has to be lots of discussion going around about that. And what are your thoughts on
bias
on those
AI?
topics? Yeah, sorry.
So
I'm
big
like,
topic.
it's a difficult topic,
Right.
for sure.
So of course you have the problem of biases, which usually come in the first place from the data sets. And you have the risk of perpetuating biases because you just use these data. I think one interesting thing is to note that using the result, and if you see that there is a bias, then it's also showing that there is a bias in the data set probably. So I think it's important to close the loop in the first place and reflect on that. So it's a way, first of all, to discover biases, but then of course, like I think now the AI community has become quite good in principle at correcting these. The main problem that I could see coming in the future is with Gen AIs that are learning from past data, maybe we'll get a bit stuck in terms of social norms. So I think there is a risk that we just start writing the same things over and over again. And if we think about the evolution of social norms, just if you go back 50 years ago, many things have changed. So I think it's not a good idea if we get stuck right now, even if we think we're at a good place. So
how do you accommodate for that? Like, if you're planning for that, is that a future solution that hasn't been developed yet, or? I think this is a hard one because what I know about humans is we're lazy. So I think if we get a suggestion of, let's say, a generated text, then
are we really going to edit it
Right.
and depart from that? I'm not sure.
Yeah, no, I have a thing in one of my classes where I looked up all of the things that humans do that are not great, and it was like a list of like 10, and each of them you could apply to like what happens with the internet and social media, and it was like, so if you know all of these things could happen, then you need to be accommodating for them in future technology, even if you don't like to think about it, that you still need to say, well, probably people are gonna steal. Like, okay, how can we stop that? You know, so on and so forth. So how can we, you know, sort of use these different technologies for good, to help, to increase the sort of amount of access and creativity and Asha, I'm looking to you for the solution for everyone, by the way.
Well, you know, I feel like I'm preaching to the converted here because I feel like there's so many people in this audience who are already building those experiences. So we know the application of immersive for, you know, for education, for health services, for mental health. We have a whole program in the UK that's funded by the government now around XR and mental health research, R&D. And the whole point of that is to we already know that's something that's valuable, but it's creating this whole new way to enable those companies to work in the NHS. I think that that's kind of the problem. Is like we already know the effectiveness, but it's more about what's the deployment at scale look like, and how do we do that in areas like healthcare, or for like social services or other spots. There's so many applications.
I was reading something about AI being, you know, having an emotional mental health support system utilizing AI technology. I think that that's really powerful when you're thinking about like suicide prevention hotlines and sort of tools that might be needed, you know, or, you know, if anyone's dealing with any sort of crisis, but to be able to have some sort of AI tool that you can speak to that actually can give you guidance or support or speak back to you in a moment where, you know, you need someone but you don't have someone. So
there was a little robot that was shown. What was the name? The name of that? Moxie. Yeah, wonderful. It was a robot, like an AI little robot for children that was supposed to be helping them with their understanding, development and mental health.
Yeah, no, in my avatars and virtual beings class, I asked them for their final paper, my students for their final paper, to create a project, a pretend virtual being for good, and what would it be? And the two most common, one was a like non-binary humans. That's one thing that they, like, it was about a third of the class. And they're all doing it individually, and about half had mental health. Like they all wanted sort of a mental health, you know, virtual being to help.
Yeah, it's incredible in you know, if you even think of like emotional support for children who are being bullied and things like that, right? To have a friend in a way, you know, somebody to talk to for guidance. I think it's really powerful.
There's a report I just saw that came, I think today, it might be spoken about later today, but it was saying that something like 87% of kids or children go looking for mental health guidance online, you know, and this is where they access that kind of information. So using it, finding tools that have AI applications to it or an XR experience, there's lots of potential for the future for that.
Sustainability as well, if we're thinking, you know, we've spoken to a lot of people developing tools for fashion and retail. And if you think about sustainability aspects of, especially in the US, we're such an over-consumption, you know, market. And if you look at fast fashion, but there's tools that people are creating where, and apps where you can literally know everything you have in your closet, and when you go into a store, if you're using that app, it can tell you already have something, or, you know, pair something for you. And so there's a lot of, you know, applications like that if used in mass, can really slow down sort of overconsumption and create more sustainability in terms of reuse and wearability. There's also in terms of vintage, clothing and sort of the resale market, NFC chips and different technologies that'll make it much easier to kind of sell directly, peer-to-peer and in the long term affect change.
Yeah, the sustainability aspect of immersive as well. Remote collaboration, obviously, like not having to travel. There's so much, information about that. The reason we started the sustainability working group, though, at Immerse, there's two reasons for it. One is to actually have the industry look at itself, and have conversations with all the main hardware providers and things like that, and understand the footprint of our industry more and how we can be more sustainable. But then also to communicate the carbon saving aspect of XR technology at a different level in government. So there's a huge net zero agendas across the board, across the world. It's massive. It's definitely massive in the UK, and we want this technology to be part of that conversation, which it's not really at the moment. Yeah.
Right.
I think AI could be a game changer in customizing education, which would be really useful to get people to the next level, and also because so far it's been really a mass-produced education system, which in a way is also excluding, like depending on how you like to learn, and also depending on where you live and your background, this could be a problem. So I think this could really be really a good thing.
I'm really excited about the future of like AI-driven characters, and there's tons of research and companies I know that are working on things like the future of philosophy education or history education, and actually having AI-driven characters interacting with students in those spaces.
Yeah,
It's still pretty new, but that was actually like a dream of mine from when I got into the industry many years ago. I was like, oh my God, how can we have that? Like someone actually debating a philosopher in a virtual space, and that's how they learn it, because we know kids. Kids read, but not as much as they did. We know the attention spans are different. The way we learn is different. The way people engage with education is different now. So this really offers.
You can train the AI based on the philosopher's writing.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. There's research being done in some different universities in the UK around that.
I did a talk for my high school reunion this summer where I got to guess what would be 25 years in the future for my high school, and use generative AI images, and said, how is it going to change the students? How will it change the teaching? How will it change the experience? And sort of fun thought experiment about where it could all go, for sure.
The thing I'm really interested in and concerned about is the upskilling of educators as this happens, because things are moving so fast, as we all know, and as we're all experiencing. And we know that governments don't move quick. Education curriculum development doesn't move quick. So I think different programs that can enable that to happen. There was a great one in the UK that was done by Story Futures Academy called Train the Trainer. And it was actually funded program to actually enable educators to come and upskill themselves so that they could upskill their programs and understand how to teach this new technology. But I think that kind of stuff is really important.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm gonna ask you a question I didn't prepare you for, just because it came to mind. Sorry.
That's cool.
So if I could give each of you a grant, which I do not have the money. I do not. But let's pretend that I just said, here's a grant of $1 million. Let's make it up because it's fake money. What would each of you do with that if you had to create change, create social change? So you can't just go, okay, thank you very much. That was really nice, Sam. But instead say, we're gonna do this and put it to good, for good, with future technologies to plan for the future. What would each of you do with that? And I don't need a budget, don't worry, because the money doesn't exist. I'm gonna start.
Okay, so the first thing that comes to my mind, again, is education. I think it's the foundation of building up a good society. And then once you have education, you can have people who will be flourishing. And so in that regard, I think maybe creating platforms or tools that will enable students in remote areas or places where they don't have access to high quality education. I think that could be something I would do.
I would fund that whole diversity pipeline thing that we're talking about before. Getting all the ducks in a line with everyone that we know that's doing any work around this, figuring out, are we duplicating efforts in any areas? Can we maybe shift what each of us is working on so that we're addressing that whole pipeline, and then funding all of those programs across the board? And then hopefully, ideally, off the back of that, industry would then step up and then help to fund it, because everyone keeps talking about, we want to hire more diverse people, we want to fund more diverse founders, but we can't find them. And I go, okay, well, there's so many programs out there that are trying really hard to create that pipeline for you, and none of them are properly supported. Support them, and then you will have a pipeline, and you will have a big pool of talent. But that takes time to build, and I think, so that's what I do with it.
Okay. Sorry to get it. It's like buying a lottery ticket that doesn't exist, but okay. Yes.
I would probably equally invest it in women-owned startups and projects in AI, Web3 gaming, and virtual worlds that are all solving for different applications that'll create more inclusive storytelling. But I think, the more women we have at the table leading these initiatives will automatically lead to more inclusivity, because women will advocate for all communities.
Yeah. No, and then I'll ask myself that, even though I didn't prepare an answer for myself, because I didn't even know that the question was going to exist, that I think I would probably start an organization to train and access, allow more people, because the students in my classes come in, they're media studies students primarily, and they're like, I don't know technology, I don't know how I'm going to do this.
Exactly.
And,
it's like a fear.
And they're like, I don't know how to code, I don't know how to do that. And I'm like, don't worry, deep breath, the goal is for you to at least start to understand it without knowing the technology, and start to see, I've invited probably 200 guests to my class over the years, where I ask everybody to give their origin story, so that people can see, gosh, that could be me, as opposed to saying, nope, I don't understand at all. And then usually about 10% of my class ends up switching careers, which is pretty wild. They go in going, I don't know anything, to wait a second, I want to do this, and then the passion is there, and the learning will happen. And so, at least for me, I would want to do it in a more than my 25 to 50 students a semester, to sort of change the trajectory of where they're going, because you need, most of my class tends to be, diverse background. So.
I also put money into early education as well, specifically around this stuff, because we get a lot of the efforts, I feel like now are mostly focused older, university, high school level, but kids don't even know, we don't even necessarily know what the jobs are going to be in 10 to 15 years, honestly, these days. But there are so many jobs that have even just become available in the last 5 years that, guidance counselors don't even know about them. So how do we get that information to kids and inspire them to want to join this?
I had that in my talk, and then even in the book, about all the potential job, different kinds of jobs that might be out there that we don't know. And so much about it is being open and flexible to learning and understanding, and not saying oh, I don't know this. It's funny, even people who I've met who are on the older end of the spectrum, not necessarily elementary school, will be like, oh, I don't know this either. And they have that same kind of reaction, and this idea of not knowing and being okay with not knowing is sort of like, what? You mean I can go into a meeting, I can go into a business meeting talking, with you about maybe doing something, and be okay that I don't know all the answers, and that isn't something that they're used to. So it's sort of fun.
I feel like we can fear AI, we can fear new technology, or we could just see this as like instead as potentially the beginning of a completely new creative renaissance. When you have, AI and no code, low code tools and all these things that make it so accessible to people that would never who fear coding or whatever else, then, that's a huge
Right.
opportunity there.
Yeah, there was one parent I met once and he was like, "You mean I don't have to teach my kids how to code?" And I'm like, you may have, like, it might be a good skill, but it might not necessarily be one that they're going to be using when they're, going to college. It might be a different.
Yeah, we have to lean into it, not away from it. And we tell all the brand C-suite leaders we meet exactly, it's nothing to fear, and you really have to lean in. And I think just on your story, I mean, I'm a non-tech founder. I have a tech startup backed by major VCs, and I just entered and pivoted into the space 4 years ago and carved out a whole niche for a consumer-driven agency. And a large part of our team all comes from decades, running brands like Nike and Target and different, wine and spirits and fashion, and and they're all working in the space. So I think it's if you 4 or 5 years ago, before the pandemic, I never would have thought I would have been in the space. So I think it's totally something you can learn and
Right.
lean into.
And then I had said before this that I used pictures from I hadn't met you before, and I used pictures from your experience in my classes. So
That's just
it was
so
sort
incredible.
of funny. So I wanted to end with just like advice to our audience, like whatever, and I think we're already sort of giving a certain amount, but if they wanted to create or make an impact or whatever, what you would suggest that they do, what could they take away from sort of our panel or from your experiences? And I'll go this way.
Yeah, I think, we're really early on, so it seems like, so much is happening. It hasn't, so there's a lot that you can still do. Look into the different grants and funds, like the Game Maker Fund at the Sandbox, but also, and I am not a fan of Discord at all. It's so complicated, unnecessarily so, but if I would recommend just joining different brand communities on Discord, following different Twitter spaces, and really just immersing yourself. And a lot of these leaders and thought leaders in the space are very responsive. So, Twitter DMs, reaching out on Discord, you'd be surprised how helpful and resourceful that can be. So if you're really interested, it's really important to kind of immerse yourself in the conferences like you are now, but definitely in the Twitter spaces, the Discord chat rooms, and just talking to people and not being afraid to share your ideas, which is exactly how, we got Metaverse Pride greenlit.
Although I do tell my students that do at least like 5 minutes of research before you reach out to them.
Yeah,
to compliment them on something that they did, whatever it might be.
Yeah,
first.
and usually right after a talk, if you reach out on LinkedIn or after Twitter Spaces, I think, so I think really just don't be afraid to do that, and don't worry if you don't know much about the space at all. Everybody's very eager to teach and help.
Yeah, mine is always to just try as many experiences as you can. Jump through virtual worlds and VR chat. I think, unfortunately, some of the most innovative and amazing projects are going to be at festivals like this, and I think it's such a shame that we can't distribute them more widely oftentimes, but anytime you can get to events like this and go and try the arcade, and that is really, really important to understand like where things are going with the technology. And then the other thing I always just say to people is just build stuff. Even if you're not technical, go and just experiment, see what you can do. And if you're in one space, like your head's down, we all have so much work to do. We all have so much on our plates. If you're an XR expert and you're not necessarily an AI expert, make the time, carve out time for yourself to go and explore those other technologies because they're converging so fast. It's a necessity actually at this point. So I think like even people in the industry already, make time for yourself to upskill in other areas or at least explore those other areas.
Yeah, it's hard. I think it's hard to predict the future.
Yeah.
So
We can
a little bit.
the only thing that you can do is keep learning, adapt very quickly. As soon as there is something new that catches your attention that you think you could be using, just try it, use it, learn from it, see if you can combine it with other things, play with things. I think keep a child's perspective on things, because when you grow up as a child, everything is changing all the time, and that's the world that we live in now.
Yeah, I do think that that's been one of the sort of greatest things about working in emerging technologies, that everybody's learning all of the time. And so when you end up talking to other people, be like, oh, you heard about that? Oh, I heard about this. Oh, you heard about, have you tried this? And it becomes this sort of big area where everybody is trying to sort of help each other while they're learning.
I took a few days off just so that I could go and I set myself a goal of trying to create a VR animated film that I've had wanting to be doing with a friend for ages, and doing it from start to finish just using AI tools, just to see how far we could get with that. That was interesting. And the answer is like not super far, to be honest.
Yeah, well, I guess that's why a lot of people like sharing on sort of whatever it is when things break, because the things do mess up, and that's sort of part of that process, and why, you know, some of AI stuff is sort of breaking before our very eyes, and people aren't necessarily used to seeing that unless you've already worked in emerging tech. And, you know, things are always shifting and changing, so you do have to just keep learning. But thank you so much for this panel today. It's been really fun. Sorry to throw in a pretend grant in the middle of everything.
Next time.
Yes, exactly. Next time, a real one. No. But thank you all. Thank you all, and thank you all for listening.
Thank you.